So Ethan was posting some stuff. uh, Elijah asks, "Hey Elijah, how you doing? Is this psychotherapy in the room with you now?" Um, so Ethan was talking about things that I think are important. Um, I don't think he was doing them very well, but I think that's because we don't do them very well. Um, and I think that's part of the problem with basically everything is we haven't been paying attention. We haven't been talking intelligently about meaning, morality, psychology, uh, philosophy, theology. Um, and frankly, the Twitter conversation was not good or um, in any way. I didn't think it was actually productive, despite the fact that I think Ethan was thinking about important things, and I think we were discussing important things. We were, in to some degree, talking past each other. Um, I put a link in the description to something stupid Yuval Harari said. Um, yeah, I realize that doesn't limit it. Um, so I went and I listened to the full TEDx talk that it was from, hoping that maybe it would redeem it. It eh, in context, is it as stupid as just the quote? Not sure. Um, but on YouTube, what I wrote was, "This is what happens when your society degenerates to such depths that its intellectuals, quote, intellectuals, have only reached the concrete operational stage of human development that the majority of humans outgrow before they are teens." Um, I think most people start understanding that concepts are useful um, when they're teens, as Piaget talks about. But our society has become so idiotically materialistic that our supposed intellectuals actually cause a degeneration to the concrete operational stage. Um, Harari is talking about. Um, Good morning, Dolly. You're welcome to join us for the conversation. Anybody who wants to join for the conversation. Um, Ethan is having dinner and he's hopefully going to be able to join us after dinner. Um, of course, it's real. Um, well, I mean, so Harari's argument was human rights isn't real because it's not physical. And his entire speech was even more idiotic because he, in a sense, was trying to do the postmodernist thing. It's super early in the morning. Um, Australians live in the future. It's the next day already. Um, although it's the future in other places already as well, but Australians always live in the future. What he was talking about is, oh, you're from South Africa, Dolly? I thought you were from Australia. Oh, she's South African. Dolly is South African. Are you from Joburg or Cape Town? When I was in yeshiva in Israel, we had a lot of South Africans. They would say, "You're from Cape Town." They would call us China a lot. I learned that in South African, just now means not now. Like, I would be like, "Are you gonna do something?" And they were like, "Yeah, just now," which meant not now, which became hilarious once I figured out that's what they meant. Okay, so back to the idea of concepts in psychology. Some of the things that, Ethan was talking about was, okay, how do you know when psychotherapy is successful? And so actually at the Lord of Spirits conference, they spoke a little bit about this. We have this artificial separation between the physical, psychological, and spiritual, right? So let's say there's a physical reason why your hand hurts. Guess what? That's going to affect you physically, obviously. It's also going to affect you mentally and spiritually. And let's say that you're depressed. You're actually depressed. Like, that's going to, you're mentally depressed, but that's going to have an impact physically and spiritually. And guess what? If you're not spiritually in the right place, you're not going to be in the right place physically and mentally either, right? So, is it useful to talk about these things? One of the examples I gave to Ethan was podiatrists, right? So, a podiatrist is a doctor of your foot, right? Or cardiologist, or take anything, right? We have people who treat parts of our body, right? There's no foot part of your body which is completely separate from the rest of your body, right? How do you really treat an infection, right? And I think that the craziest thing here is the fact we have dentists, and dentistry is somehow something outside of medicine, right? So, yeah, there are artificial separations, but these are useful separations, right? It's useful to know that someone is a cardiologist versus someone is a podiatrist versus someone is a dermatologist, right? It's useful when there's something wrong with your car to know if you need to go to an auto body shop or you need to go to a mechanic. Even though, like, your car is one thing, right? And one of the things that Ethan was pointing out was, okay, an individual's sanity is not resident in themselves alone, which reminded me of the fact that in substance abuse therapy, they talk about the identified patient. And the identified patient is usually the person who's the alcoholic or it has the abusive, right? Is the addict, supposedly, right? But you don't get one person who is the addict in separation from the system which allowed them to get into that situation which we refer to as, especially like serious addiction, right? um and the question becomes like, okay, so is this sin, right? Is a drunkard a sinner? Well, mhm, where like AA, the 12-step model, integrates religious um, themes and this idea of higher power and this idea of like, um, and there is repentance and right, and so like, is it sinful to drink alcohol, right? And we are not sufficiently discussing this. So today, I was at the shelter I work with um, Catholic Charities, and I went into the chapel, right? And that chapel never gets used. And near, yes, this is shadow. And near this shelter, there is basically all I can call it is a Satanist temple. It really is a Satanist temple. Like it's a temple of a Santeria deity that, I mean, uh, Dolly says, this is straight up unfair right now. What's unfair? The fact that I get to have a kitty purring in my lap? Yeah, I guess that could be unfair. I love cats too, although I never thought I did. I'm definitely a dog person, and I was always on team dog, and I would make all kinds of jokes about murdering cats and cats being house spawn. But a purring kitty in your lap will, in fact, change your mind about cats. Yes. Hi, Cassandra. Um, okay, back to what I was hoping to talk about. Like, we have made a profound and ugly and stupid mistake, which is our psychotherapists have become substitute priests. And I actually think that's where Ethan was making his best points, although I don't think he was making them very well. And that's part of why I wanted to have him on and talk to him about it, because I think he's grasping at something important that unfortunately we're not talking about, that at least this little corner should be talking about a lot more. Glad to hear it, KL. I think the streams would be better if there were people here on here and I wasn't just. Oh wow, that's a hectic statement. Digging deeper into that is a good idea, I think. Which particular statement that our priests have become? Yes, I am a Persian Jew. I was born in Tehran, and I am Jewish. Although I have to warn people, I do not claim to be a Jew to Christians because I've seen what their books say. What did Ethan say? Maybe I'll let. Persians are crazy about their cats. No, actually, most Persians I know don't like cats either. Although in Muslim countries, like cats are the only acceptable pets because there are stories of Muhammad having pet cats. But that's beside the point. I want Ethan to represent himself because, frankly, I don't think he was doing it very well on Twitter. What do you want? Happy wants attention, people. I think she may be hungry. I gave you food not too long ago. You shouldn't be that hungry. Okay, somebody is insisting on being fed, and her name is Happy. I will be back, people. I really should open the new bag of dog food I just bought, but that's going to take forever. So I think I'm going to give somebody some treats. Okay, Happy, come earn your dinner. Can you guys see? Okay, Happy, sit. Sit. Paw. 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 Come on. Paw. Good girl. Did you guys see that? Hello, Sandy.
Hey.
Cats and dogs living together.
Cats and dogs are amazing.
They are. So instead of religion, we have psychology. Is that the idea? I think for a lot of people, that's what it's become. Yeah. Is Happy a Rottweiler? I think she has some Rottweiler in her. I don't know. So, Sandy,
Yes.
what did you want to say?
Music is therapy, but it's not psychotherapy. I'm just in from guitar group. So I missed most of whatever you're talking about that Ethan would have said because I've actually been out in real life today.
Real life is a good thing.
Apparently, I had 2 good conversations, and agreed to go back and volunteer on 2 Tuesdays a month.
Dolly wants to know if you painted the painting behind you.
I did.
Oh, wow.
Not recently. Yeah, it's from high school. There. Oh, where is it?
It's very good.
Slide it back out. Yeah, that's oil. Back when you were allowed to do oil paints in high school. They don't let you anymore.
Really? Why?
Fumes. Probably because of the cleaners.
Really?
Well, I don't know. They didn't for a while. I haven't been in high school for a while, so I'm not sure.
Oh, they have to let.
They have since invented water-based oil paints because that's not a conundrum.
I think most people use acrylics these days, don't they?
Yeah, you can. Yeah. I don't think we had acrylics when I went to school. It was watercolors, oil, pastels, charcoal, pencil sketches, things like that. Oh, and we had a loom. One of the girls was she was learning how to create. I don't know if it was like a wall hanging.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay, back to the topic of psychotherapy. So part of what Ethan seemed to be saying is, why do you have to be so goddamn sarcastic, dude? Am I?
I just said, were you?
When was I sarcastic?
I don't know. I missed it.
I don't think I was sarcastic. Anyway. I think sometimes people think I'm being sarcastic when I'm not.
Could be.
Anyway, back to the point. What was I saying? Ethan. So Ethan was pointing to a bunch of stuff. I don't think he was describing it the way. Gage might jump in. Gage is actually on the board of directors of Fountain of Comfort, and he's supposed to be streaming on Fountain of Comfort. Actually, by the way, Fountain of Comfort now has a Twitter, which I haven't been using much, but it does exist. Where is it? There it is. Here, I will put the Twitter link in the chat so people can go and subscribe. We also have a Fountain of Comfort channel, which on YouTube, which nobody uses. Nobody really looks at, but it's there. So back to what I thought I was saying. Okay. So you have somebody who is a drunk. Now, is that a mental health issue? Is that a behavioral issue? Or is that a sin?
Yes.
Good answer. Yes. So, I mean, it certainly can be a sin, but it's not a psychologist or a substance abuse therapist or a psychiatrist or a medical doctor that deals with sin, right? And we have this idea of, okay, let's say, God forbid, I kill someone, right? Then, if I'm being prosecuted in court, we go to a psychologist to evaluate whether or not I am fit to stand trial, and I can be found not guilty by reason of insanity.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, where exactly, why exactly is this psychologist like making a decision whether or not you are guilty of a crime? And there's a lot that goes into it, right? There's a lot of thinking that's gone into all of this and why we have psychology. And I think where it's broken down is because in the secular, we've tried to get rid of the role of the priest, get rid of the religious, right, in determining this is sin, this is evil. And to some extent, like, we are offended by the idea that someone who may be mentally ill needs to be exorcised of a demon, right? So, like, exorcism versus demon possessed versus like mentally ill, right? And all of this is because we aren't really discussing things in ways that make sense, which brings me back to the Yuval Harari video that I linked in the description. Did any of that make any sense?
A lot of it makes sense. It leaves me with some questions.
What are your questions?
So starting with the assessment, is the purpose of the assessment to stand in the place of the judge or the jury to say what the not the action, you already know what happened, in a sense. So they're asking, why did it happen? How did it happen? Those kind of questions in a court.
So
is the psychologist's purpose to assess where the trial should take place, how it should take place?
No.
Also where they will end up, because jail, mental institution, like.
Okay, let me explain. In order, so our criminal system comes from the Bible. And Trey, how you doing?
Hello, doing good.
Trey is also on the board of Fountain of Comfort.
I am? Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, he's the secretary of the board of directors of Fountain of Comfort.
I am?
Yep.
What?
So
Bro, I didn't know that.
All those receipts you were supposed to receive for your donations in 2022 that didn't get 2023 that didn't get sent out, it's all Trey's fault.
Actually, no, I did send them out. You didn't see them? I just need to check your email. It's probably in the junk folder.
Actually, I think PayPal may have sent receipts automatically, but I have to check. Like, that's something I have to do. And Trey jumping on reminded me of that. But yeah, by the end of the month, I have to do that. Okay. Oh, and Garth loved your cameo on the Freddie and Paul show.
Yeah. That's pretty sick.
So, our legal system is based on the Bible. And in the Bible, there is
what do you mean by based on the Bible?
They were trying to figure out our legal system. They looked at the Bible and they decided that's what they're going to do.
Mm-hmm. But it's not all of the Bible, right?
What do you mean?
Well, we're not stoning gays,
Actually, that's precisely why they did have, like, the British, like, yeah, the court system really does come from. Anyway, let's not go too far off track. But in the Bible, there is a differentiation made between negligent homicide and intentional homicide, and that's why we have negligent homicide, and we have murder, right? Now, so the way that's explained in the British legal system is every crime, major crime, has to have two components. It's what's called the actus reus, which is the actual act, which is something bad, and there's the mens rea, which is the evil intent, right? So if you don't have an evil intent, right? So you kill someone and you didn't mean to kill that person, there's no mens rea, there's no evil intent, so you can only be convicted of negligence, right? And that's a much lesser crime. And so what eventually happened were they distinguished between sane people who decided to kill people and insane people who didn't decide to kill people. So this actually happened in my building, the building I'm living in right now. Is
The building.
There was an old couple. He had
Young couple.
dementia, and she was taking care of him. And one night, in the middle of the night, he woke up and he didn't recognize her, and he killed her.
Yikes.
Yeah, putting him in prison makes no sense to anyone, right? So the question becomes, like, okay, is this someone who's insane, or is this someone who's sane and pretending like that's like we can't tell the difference between, okay, this is a bad person who decided they wanted to kill people, and this is someone with serious mental problems, right? We can tell the difference, but pretending like there's no gray area, like it's a actual line that's easy to like draw, that's also a pretense.
Sidebar question then, because there was one of the things before the courts here at the moment is something from a few years back, where a number of people were killed by a van. I had friends who online were alluding to various potential causes for why the action happened and who the person was. But it was a young man with autism and a lot of anger issues. So that's why I was asking the question awkwardly that I did, because there's still that spot of, is it deemed insanity to have a mental health disorder, or is it like, how do they handle that?
Good question. And the fact is that it's not clear that every court is going to handle it the same way. Different jurisdictions have different ways of handling it, partially because, like, this is not an easy thing. And unfortunately, we have people who believe the science, right? And we have people who, like, I am a scientist and I get to decide. And it's like, I mean, let's look at what's going on with Jordan Peterson, right? The Ontario's College of Psychology is taking away his license because he's unwilling to lie.
He doesn't want to.
Are you serious about that?
Instructions. That's what he says.
That's how I view it. Yeah.
Could you steel man the case? Just steel man it for me, please.
Sure. They want all psychologists to agree with their view, and they are willing to take away any psychologist's license who does not do as they say. That's the steal.
Do you think that if a psychologist incited a riot, right, and used his degree as a force for inciting a riot, do you think that the college should do anything about that?
No, I think if that's illegal, then it should go to the courts like any crime, right? So let's say you take your car and you kill someone. Does that mean that the manufacturer of your car gets to come and take your car back?
No. Let me give another example. Let's say that we have a bunch of cars, right? And there was a company there was like there was actually no, I got some. Oh yeah, there was a company that rated the best cars, so they would have like, this is on our best car list, right? And then the next year, basically, like, all these cars started exploding for no reason, right? Do you think it's reasonable for that company to say, oh no, we revoke our number one spot because of this information?
Sure. What does that have to do with your license, his license to be a psychologist?
I'm not saying it's justified, but you're just kind of giving a bad steelman.
Like,
so is this
justification.
Was the original discussion on something related to this case, or was it talking about was it talking about something different? What Ethan commented on.
So one of the things that they're doubling down on, I mean, a lot of the things that they were doubling down on are just idiotic, but like the thing they're doubling down on is he said of a swimsuit, like the swimsuit edition with the thing, he said not beautiful. Like, to take away someone's psychology license because he tweeted something, like, it has nothing to do with being a psychologist. It has to do with them being fascists. It's pure fascism. That's all it is.
My question, though, is this the topic that you started talking about from Ethan, or is this an additional topic inside that?
It is related. The reason they have to be fascists about psychologists is because psychologists have become the new priests, and they can't have him not being one of it's exactly like if he were a Roman Catholic priest and he wasn't doing what the Pope was saying, because that's who our priests are now, is psychologists. As a clinical psychologist, he has to follow the theology that they have.
I understand it to a degree, in the sense that even in my employment papers and things, there are certain ridiculous things that, well, they aren't ridiculous, but they kind of are, that you have to follow so you don't end up with conflict of interest. But the way that it pans out is, it kind of makes sense, but it's so controlled that you're correcting things that don't need correcting, so that you will correct the things that do. And so I kind of get.
I don't understand what you're saying, Sandy.
Pardon?
I don't understand what you're saying.
Like, so, in the sense, when.
Hello, Rabbi.
Hey, Rabbi Mullet. When you're employed, or when, like, if I'm a teacher, I have to go before an accreditation committee from that. Working in retail like I do, there are certain expectations. You can go to a labor board based on things, but there's always that somebody that
involves your work. This doesn't involve his work at all. Like, this involved his work not at all.
Okay, so then I'm going to leave that for now, because I want to know what the psychotherapy discussion was, or is this the psychotherapy discussion?
Well, I mean, it's related. The problem, part of the problem is that we have not had the discussions around these things, especially I think we need to in this little corner. And because we haven't discussed these things, it's like all over, the discussion is all over the place. We don't have a vocabulary. We're not actually discussing things. And so there were several things which Ethan said, right? So, for example, he was saying psychotherapy is treats the individual, and it's like, and like separate is about separating the individual from society, and it's like, well, no, it's actually the opposite of that. And there were good points he was pointing to, right? But they're so much more complicated, and we just don't have a vocabulary for talking about this situation because we're not intelligently discussing this situation, which is we have an order of priests who are psychologists who are illegitimately becoming secular priests, right? So when a husband and wife have problems, they're going to a marital counselor, right? As opposed to going to their priest, right? And I mean, there are things which are, who's Sandra?
No.
Okay, it's weird. There's a like there are things which someone who is skilled in conflict resolution can help with, right? There are things which, so when I was thinking about Fountain of Comfort, right, I considered making it a religious organization. And I went and I spoke to my rabbi, and he said that's a terrible idea because a religious plumber doesn't start a synagogue that does plumbing. He starts a plumbing business which is run according to religious values, right? There are things which psychologists, similar to doctors as surgeons, right, are capable of doing. There's things which are more spiritual and values based, which need to come from your theology and your religion. And unfortunately, we're in this silly place in our society where the psychologists have become secular priests.
I'm not disagreeing, but I would like some clarity on that.
I think that's what Ethan was pointing to. And so I'll give you an example. Whether or not people should get divorced. That's become something that psychologists are telling people whether or not they should stay married or not. That's not their role.
Okay. So I'm going to ask some questions if that's okay.
Sure.
If you go to your priest, your rabbi, your whoever, and they don't feel qualified to actually give a judgment based on some of the factors they don't know about that situation, who do they send you to?
Good question. And unfortunately, I think a lot of them defer to psychologists in ways that are inappropriate.
I'm thinking of several different directions that people from when I was in church, that they would get several places they would have been directed to for several different causes, and also to a couple of people with training who actually were members of the congregation, who would then be able to actually, if people felt they needed to meet on site there, that they would meet them there as well.
Well, that's part of, Paul Vanderklay talks about this. He talks about the secular moral deism and the abdication of the pastoral responsibility to therapists, and therapists, I think this is most obviously happened in Protestant circles.
Possibly. I know I follow one Jewish counselor who is a rabbi. And even though I don't, even though I don't understand half of the language, because it's Hebrew, not English, I do find listening to him very useful, because he is able to kind of walk that place where he can explain things from several perspectives. Not every person wants to be multi-career trained. And I know from some of the pastors, at least that I know, that would become an issue if they were called on to be both things. That's when you asked your initial question, what is this? Is it some kind of spiritual? Are they demon possessed? Are they something else? Is it a sin? Those three, I said yes, because there can be layers of all three areas in involvement in any one issue.
And confusing those is the problem.
Well, and so everybody should, at least, I would think, in terms of those career choices, be aware of how to discern between them. But the point at which they interact, I would want to at least see some kind of team approach to some of these things.
There needs to be an actual discussion of, okay, this is sin or it's not sin. And where the entire discussion goes off the rails is where people say, oh, you can, hey, there's Ethan. Ethan, we've been talking about you for almost an hour. Where the discussion goes completely off the rails is where people say the priest has no place in this discussion at all. And I think a majority of people say that, and they're just plain wrong.
Yeah, that you can't. Yeah, I would agree. There has to be a place for whoever the religious guide is, whether rabbi or priest or.
Right. It has to always, religion has to be at the top of the hierarchy. Your spirituality has to be in its proper setting and its proper place. And if it's missing, then you turn other things into idols. I think Pajot really, his ARC conference, speech, really hit the nail on the head. And the question, okay, why is the ARC conference, like, what was going on at the ARC conference? There was art, there was religion, there was politics, there was psychology. It's being convened by Jordan Peterson, right? And this little corner, or the Jordan Peterson sphere, right? It's being convened by Jordan Peterson, who is not a religious person, but, well, he is a religious person, but he's not a religious authority.
Right.
Right? And so his authority, like, I think what makes him a good psychologist is when he refuses to be a secular priest. He recognizes what his role is as a clinical psychologist, which is not to be a priest. And that's why he's the heretic that they have to get rid of his psychological thing.
So in a sense, the fact that he recognizes what he is and what he is not is part of my point as to why I see some form of team approach being a much more practical thing, where you have people from the different spheres of influence in the person's behavior, whatever it was, who can speak to the component parts and determine what needs to be done about it.
Yeah. I mean, as long as you actually integrate the religious into the rest of it, just like a medical doctor, right? Nobody, and I almost named this, I was trying to figure out how to name this stream. And one of the ways I thought of framing it is, should we close all the gender clinics?
I don't think that would have taken people in the current, I don't think that from what you've pointed out, that would help in terms of getting people to listen to what you actually want to explain. I think you chose well.
Ryan!
Hey.
How you doing?
I'm all right. Sorry, I'm just trying to get set up. Yeah, I missed most of this, but I couldn't resist your clickbait title.
See?
You know?
You're a counseling student, so you have to put a title.
Oh, on my thing?
I can do it.
Okay. But
I'm gonna make
all. Give me like the summary of what you've been talking about.
So we've been talking. Okay, so Ethan was posting things on Twitter about psychology, which I think were hitting important stuff, important ideas, but he wasn't speaking about them very well. And I thought Twitter was a bad place to have the discussion. And I wanted, which meme was it, Ethan? Psychologist doesn't give a lecture series on the Book of Genesis. Except he does. Except he does. And that's, which meme are you talking about, Ethan? I am checking Ethan's.
So are we talking about like the whole split between like secular psychology and religious, like?
Oh, here.
Whatever.
Here, this is the meme he's talking about. Let me pull it up. Psychotherapy treats something that doesn't exist, the individual. It's entirely useless, if not evil. Change my mind. First of all, I have to say, psychotherapy, while it treats the individual, it can't treat just the individual. Like, you have the identified patient, yeah, but there's a reason why I think actually there's a reason why I actually think social work is the better of the various psychotherapy degrees, because people in individual, like, there is no, you don't have sanity as an individual. Your sanity is part of everything else. Yeah, I mean, okay, now you're straw manning, Ethan. Anything that blames your mother for anything is evil.
Well, okay, can I, like, first off, what are we even talking about? Like, when we say psychotherapy, like, if I sit down and talk with a buddy who's having a hard time, and I'm not in like counselor mode, but I'm like, helping them think through stuff, and I'm not giving them the answer, I'm helping them grow in self-awareness a little bit. Is that psychotherapy? Is that bullshit? I don't think so. But like, obviously something is different when you shift into, now someone is paying me to do it. There's like very strict boundaries, and it's in this like really pretentious like tradition, right? But like, what's the actual distinction between those two things?
I was trying to get at that point in relating to other career choices, and even in retail, where you have certain qualifications and ways you're required to behave, and it's about the normal plus the whatever the job description requires of you in performing that. But I don't know if that fits the topic you guys are studying.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's we've segmented everything. Everything is so like isolated to its own little sphere or its own little context, and it's like, that's modernity, and some of these problems come from that. And so when we say psychotherapy is evil, it's like, that only even makes sense as a statement in a very segmented, isolated, like hyper small contextual environment. And it's like, okay, yeah, I'm not necessarily like super jazzed about the current psychotherapy model and how secular it is and how isolated it is from everything. But also, it's like, it's not dumb.
And it's necessary. I mean, so when I was thinking of how to set up Fountain of Comfort, I went and I spoke to my rabbi, and I went and spoke to the abbess of an Eastern Orthodox convent, monastery. And both of them told me the same thing. Religion is not the same. Like, what Mother Markella said was, people come to me with someone who's like psychotic, and yeah, I'll pray for them the same way I'll pray for somebody who has cancer, but they need to go to a doctor, right? And like, there is such a thing as having a, like, the DSM is not a joke. It's an actual thing. These are actual, like, diagnosable problems that show up, and you can.
There are problems at one level of abstraction. And I think that's where this conversation gets lost a lot. It's like, if you kind of go up the hierarchy, you can describe the same problems in spiritual terms, right? And the argument tends to be like, which of these layers is like the correct layer to describe things from? And it's like, if you're stuck thinking in that very dialectical like way, it's like, you're gonna miss the whole point, right? So it's like, yes, the DSM descriptions are good, and yes, the spiritual equivalent descriptions of these same problems are good, and like, let's just see it all together as much as possible, right? And maybe that's a naive approach, but like, I don't think so.
When I jumped on, one of the things Jacob was saying was that part of the issue is we don't have language to describe these. But when I'm listening to you, Ryan, it makes me think back to some of the things we were talking about. So my oldest son has autism.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've gone and had some teaching on that. I've also had some need to go to counselors. I tried going through a religious one. I've gone to both, secular and religious. And so the point in those two things with language is, when I went to the autism organization for some of their training, one of the big points was that for a person with autism, you must have theory of mind. You must be able to anticipate and read a situation so that you understand what's going on. And the answer, the example was, child walks into kindergarten class, teacher says, would you like to sit down? Autistic child says, no. And then you go to
You're telling the truth. Yeah.
And then you go to the marriage counselor or any of the other ones who say mind reading is an absolute no. It is bad, evil. You must not read other people's minds. They have to represent themselves. And I'm thinking, I tried explaining, what does this mean? Because here's this crossover point.
Right.
So linguistically, both of those people are in similar fields and giving me different definitions. And then the rest try to talk about it.
Ethan is asking good questions, even though he refuses to come on.
Well, okay, I want to get to the point he made earlier about sorry, okay, we can go with that.
I mean, how many prophets would be diagnosed with schizophrenia?
All of them.
Really?
They're really good at it. Sorry.
I remember seeing this meme about the Desert Fathers like a year ago or something. That was basically the same point. It was like,
yeah,
basically like the Chad meme of them like, I have so many eating disorders and schizophrenia and stuff, right? But then these monastics have produced some of the greatest works that have been, extremely influential for my life. So yeah, I mean, it's a good point. It's like, what is our vision for what healthy is and what unhealthy is? Because that's your frame. And if your frame is, the kind of modern secular, like, well, I just want to, I want to feel good all the time. I want to have full autonomy. Okay, that can be your frame, but it's going to lead you to certain results. I mean, you're basically like, where we end up with this conversation is, in my mind, is like, where are you starting? Like, what's your telos? What's your vision? What do you think is actually the point of all things?
Which are religious questions. And those questions have to be answered by the religions, right? By your theology.
This is something that drives me crazy about the counseling world, because it's like, okay, they're making their best efforts to have like codes of ethics and stuff, but they have axioms built into the code of ethics. So like they just say we are pursuing wellness, but wellness is not defined on purpose because it can't be, because that is a spiritual question, right? And they wouldn't like me framing it that way, but that's what it is. It's like you have to assume a vision of what wellness is before you can pursue it, right? And as a culture, or as a multiplicity of cultures, we can't agree on what wellness even means, and that's where we're at. And it doesn't seem like a solvable problem until you have a unified vision of like all things.
Right.
Well, but then
people are blaming psychology for the fact that religion and theology have failed to do their job. And I mean, again, I think, when it comes down to ethics, right? So in university, where do they study ethics? In the religion department, right? That's where ethics resides as a discipline, in the religion department. Except when I was at USC, the religion department could have everyone in it except people who were religious.
Which is weird, because the only ethics thing I took, which was just part of a BA, was moral philosophy. And they were talking about it.
Right. But how do you talk about that without a religious framework? Our problem is the fact that theology has failed, and we're trying to replace it with all kinds of idols, which includes psychology.
Right.
Psychology has become an idol and people are blaming the idol as opposed to the fact that there's no, that we have no religious frame, we have no theology departments to speak of.
I'm still thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I think of that little anecdote from Nietzsche, the madman, you know? It's like we've killed God and now we're just kind of spinning and there is no center. We're unchained from the sun. And it's like, that's where we're at. And so everyone just tries to grab onto whatever they see, like whatever's right in front of them. It's like, I mean, yeah, it's inevitable. Like we did this to ourselves, you know?
Yeah, we killed God and
So,
yeah.
how do you help people who don't have a framework of religious language? Like I gave you an example from two aspects of, like various people that would work with, the autism guides would work with through the DSMV. I'm not sure where the marital counselors come in with that. But counselors in general, unless people bring up the topic of religion, and if you don't have good language, like
it's even beyond that, Sandy. Like,
but I'm starting there.
Ethically, we're not supposed to treat someone's religion.
Yeah,
well, we're not supposed
you're really good at it. You can get to talk about it.
We're supposed to help them pursue spiritual wellness, which, well, maybe, I mean, honestly, maybe your education is different than mine because you're doing the social work thing. But like in my counseling education, it's like we're not supposed to impose values, but we are supposed to help them become more aware of their own sense of their own spirituality.
Sure,
right.
But they have to have spiritual direction, which we cannot give them.
Right.
That's not our job.
Yeah. But to Sandy's point, I mean, I think this is, for me, it's like, yes, I have a vision of where I think the world should go in terms of healthy, but like in the meantime, I'm becoming a counselor because I think like, yeah, me helping someone become aware that they need spirituality is at least a step in that direction. And so I can appreciate these really idealistic visions of people like Ethan, but it's like, I think you're wrong if you just like refuse to do anything because you have the vision and we're not at the vision. Like, okay, well, let's take a step in that direction. A step in that direction is, man, let's help people like become a little bit more aware that maybe they actually need spirituality. Maybe it's not a great thing that we killed God, you know? And like,
but that's not the place. I mean, okay, our society needs to recognize that's not a good thing. Now, individuals who are having problems because they don't have spiritual direction and a symbolic framework and an actual framework of values, right? Okay, a counselor can help, right? Like, make clear to you that you have a problem.
But it is by no means the solution. It's not anywhere, and it's not anywhere close to the solution.
And the fact people think it's a solution is the problem that I think Ethan correctly was talking about.
Yeah. I mean, to your point, Jacob, it's like I've noticed, like, even though I'm still only in school for it and I'm not even doing it for real, people treat me weird when I say I'm studying counseling. It's like, it's as if I said I was a priest. I mean, it's the same mentality. It's like, oh, all of a sudden they start seeing me as a guru. It's like, what are we doing? This is weird. You know?
That's why they have to take Jordan Peterson's license away from him.
But wait, backing up from that, I want to respond to something Ryan just said, is that if they respond to you as if you were a priest, is part of the issue the fact that when people who don't really engage with religion see a priest or somebody in that, they're thinking of, like ask most secular people, what would they say religion is? Is it the monk sitting on top of the mountain? You see it in the movies and you make this long journey up to the person with the most wisdom and you ask your question and you come back. Is that all that we're seeing, that kind of thing? And if so, then that's part of the problem, is that other people, movies and things are also training people to imagine what things like this are. I look back 30 years, a lot of the kung fu movies and things. My kids love that, but I remember watching one of them, and it was about the wisdom of the sage.
Yeah, exactly.
But the wisdom of the sage is not the same thing necessarily. It is related to religion, but it isn't the priest, the rabbi, it's something else. Like, is it like me trying to have the conversation across lines of what does mind reading mean? You know, what does wisdom mean? What does a sage mean? What does, you know, who is your prophet? Those kind of things. Do we know what religion is?
Yeah, I mean, to your point, I think it is. It's almost as if people long to have someone that they trust, someone that they perceive as wise, that they trust, that they can go to for help seeking transformation or the good or whatever they happen to be desiring. And, you know, 1,000 years ago, that very likely would have been my local priest or my local shaman or like whatever, right? And we've lost that, and there's nothing has really filled in that gap. Like, we don't have people that we see as wise, and so we go to, yeah, I mean, we go to public figures who, whatever. We go to our local, you know, our local shaman, which is my counselor, you know. But now it can be anyone anywhere in the world, and so I can, you know, go to a guru in Florida virtually, you know. And so it's like now we're kind of going up and up and up, and like still seeking wisdom and thinking like, oh, now I can expand my search even broader and become even more hyper specific in like the ways I'm searching. You know, it's a very odd situation. It's become completely decontextualized. It's like a decontextualized search for wisdom or for a wise guru.
Garth says, I will say having a girlfriend is great therapy. No, I mean, I think the problem, which Ethan very clumsily, I have to say, Ethan, but very rightly is pointing towards, is there is, like, we're looking towards psychology for the wrong, like, for things that psychology cannot, does not, will not provide. And that's a huge problem. At the same time, I mean, there's a reason why I keep on pointing people towards Vervaeke, because Vervaeke is the one who says, oh, if you're coming to me with all of these psychological problems, I will tell you that they all manifest because because our spiritual religious framework is bereft of actual wisdom and truth and beauty.
Mm-hmm.
And he's right. And that's why, like, despite himself, despite the fact he very much does not want to, he's he also a counseling student. Gage is also on the board of directors of Fountain of Comfort.
How's it going?
And yeah, we're looking in the wrong place. We're looking in the wrong place, and I don't know what else to say about that. Yes, Gage.
I just hopped on, so I'm not exactly sure where we are in the conversation. I had a phone call. What's the? Cue me in a few sentences.
Okay, what I have been saying is there's a lot of people who we obviously have a problem. We have a mental health problem. We have a societal crisis, which includes a mental health problem.
Right.
Many people are looking towards psychology for the answers.
Right.
And it's the only answer that I think psychology has properly given is you're looking in the wrong place.
That's fair. I mean, so this, just speaking personally, this was something that I struggled to kind of grapple with personally when deciding whether or not to kind of go into this field, because I was kind of, do I go this route and kind of play the official clinical game to do what I, to try and help people, or do I feel like it's best to avoid that? And that wasn't an easy decision for me. And I could, if people are curious, I can talk about kind of the complexities of that. But I did end up doing it, partly because I think there's a very unique opportunity right now. And I know, Jacob, you talk about this, that there's very much feels like there's this moment, occurring in the mental health field right now that I see weird correspondences between, obviously there's nothing like literally directly corresponding, but like between what's happening in TLC and what's happening in the mental health field. And
no. Hold on. The Claudine Gay getting fired from like Harvard University's president, like being fired, like the repercussions in the psychological field is huge.
Yeah, right.
And largely because she was a complete fraud as a social scientist. And psychology, in a very real sense, is the pinnacle of social science, but it needs to be grounded. So, okay, I had several questions I thought I could start this discussion with. One of them was, is a drunkard mentally ill, has a problem, or is he a sinner? Right? Is it behavioral? Is it a mental defect or disease? Or is it a sin? Right?
Right.
Another one was, okay, let's look at the laws that people are trying to pass against gender clinics for kids, right? It's like, are you seriously trying to tell me that this child whose parents were about to have this child like have surgery would be better off if you just closed? Do you really think that child is better off if you closed this clinic and all access to it, right? Then, like, oh, hold on, we have a problem here. Like, the doctor thinks the proper solution here is to give. He did come on. Is to like chop this person's gonads off.
Well, okay, so like the issue here in my mind is that like we foolishly see things as too linear. And I'm not trying to make like a Marxist argument, but things are systematic. Like I have a software product and and it's a mess. Why is that? If you're looking for one thing to blame, then you're a fool. Like, then you don't understand the problem, because the problem was a manifestation of a whole bunch of different factors playing in tandem with each other over time, right? Like, yes, there were bad architects 20 years ago, and that led to where we are today. And yes, there have been people who haven't understood the code, and so they pile on worse and worse code over time. Like, but it's like these things are all playing in tandem with each other. You can't just point to one thing and say that's the problem. And if that's what we're trying to do with this whole mental health thing, then it's like you don't get it. Right? So like, yeah, it's a sin. And yes, the mother contributed. And yet, like, all these things are all true at the same time, right? And if you're looking just to say, like, well, that's the one thing, no.
Ethan, speak.
Don't implicate the mother. If you implicate the mother, you're evil.
There are times when there's
I don't care. It's non-negotiable.
Why? Oh, mothers are never wrong?
They are never wrong, as far as you're concerned.
That's completely silly. That's silly, Ethan.
So
okay. Well,
sorry, I want to understand, like, what Or sorry, go ahead, Sandy.
No, it's okay. You can ask him. I'm going to still be a mother in 5 minutes.
I wanna understand exactly the point you're trying to make, Ethan, because I think
I just made it. Mothers are never wrong.
It's clearly wrong, and you're clearly a fool if you mean that literally.
I mean it literally.
Okay, so
there's no point in
I'm happy. I'm content with being a fool.
Okay.
what happens when the mother is wrong and you
She's
don't
not.
allow the opportunity for her
Then
to
the child suffers.
the part of apology?
The child suffers. If we're going to accept this absurdity that the mother is wrong, then the child suffers.
So my oldest has autism. Used to be called, blamed on the mother because she was obviously a frigid mother and could not relate to the child. Happily, they
So
have
did somebody tell you that?
Pardon?
Did somebody tell you that?
Not as a diagnosis, no, but it was still a phrase in at least accessible parlance back in the day. And then, the mother is never wrong. The mother is never wrong can be destructive to the family unit in the sense that it doesn't give a woman who has children the potential to have some breathing space, to be an active person, and to teach her children from that place where she has the potential for failure and to show them how you can work through failure. I've had my sons absolutely adore me, but I have had those conversations with them where I have said things like, "You remember when I said this?"
Can I pause you for a second?
You can. I'm going to use a word you want to hear because I was going to say, in this, I wasn't necessarily wrong in what I said, the specific what, but the manner in which I dealt with it, that was wrong.
Okay.
I have to be allowed that freedom or I can't have that relationship with my children.
I'll say this. You can be wrong, but a mother can never be wrong.
I'm still trying to understand what exactly you mean, because you're clearly not saying that a mother can't sin.
There's no objectivity to a mother. It's a relationship.
Okay. Okay. See, that's progress. Yeah,
this is what I want. This is why I'm bringing up examples, because I want to know, because I also had a mother. She died last year. No, oh my goodness. She died in 2022. When I was young, there was no proper relationship with her. My parents did this weird divvy up the kids thing. I was my dad's kid. My sister was my mom's kid. That is wrong. She was wrong in participating in that. So even though she was still my mother and I loved her as my mother, which I think is what you're getting at in one way, until we could both come to a place where we could talk about the ways in which some of our choices and the ways we were being who we are, and my relationship as a daughter, her relationship as a mother, unless we could get to that point, we couldn't really bring our relationship into that place that earlier in sense of religion, which is one aspect of this discussion. Jacob mentioned beauty and truth and something else. Our relationship in the last 10 years of her life was so much bigger and better than it was in the first, 60, 50 years of my life, because we allowed ourselves to have that discussion, to be vulnerable to each other. If you aren't wrong, you aren't given permission to be vulnerable. And very much from a woman's perspective, I mean, I would hope you would say the same thing as for a father. As well. But the thing is, whether you're a mother or a father or whoever you are, you have to be allowed to be wrong.
Who's okay? Who's admitting the guilt? Is your mother admitting the guilt, or are you admitting the guilt of your mother?
Give me a little more.
Well, it sounds like what we're talking about is Ethan is saying that Sandy, you have your perceptions of your mother, and you're operating entirely within your perceptions of your mother, but that's not the same thing as your mother. And is that part of what you're getting at, Ethan?
there's a difference between you there's a difference between you admitting the guilt of your mother. Let me okay, I need to be careful with my language. There's a difference between you asserting the guilt of your mother and your mother confessing her guilt to you.
And
Blaming-
within that,
okay,
one
so-
other question would be,
Hold on,
how do you come to
Sandy,
that?
Sandy. I'm trying to enunciate what Ethan is saying, which I agree with, which is there is this idea of you going to therapy, and I have to say, like, this is a very stylized and television version of therapy, and you learn to be like, oh, my mom did X, Y, and Z, and that's why the world sucks. And if I blame my mom, right, then that's vindicating me somehow. And, well, first of all, I don't think that's how good therapy works at all. I think that's television therapy. But there are times when what you have to realize the most is my mom is a human being, and I idealized her and her position, and that's what's causing me to suffer, especially in how I view myself. And that's something that's real, that happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard that. And I think it goes to the place of people determining what is real. And that was on the other side of what you just said, Jacob, why I said you have to also allow for mothers to be wrong. And putting it from my perspective with my sons, giving them permission at points to point out places where, and maybe it is as a person and not the role of mother, but wherever it is in the equation, I think when we give each other permission to define some of those things, there's some health to it. At least there was in my family.
If a mother asks of your forgiveness, you may forgive her, but you can never demand her. You can never demand that she repent or that she reconcile with you, ever.
Well, you can't
Okay.
get that of anyone.
Yeah.
Okay. You can never judge your mother.
I don't think that's true.
No, I wouldn't think that was true either, because that goes to my expression of boundaries. I judge whether my coffee is hot or cold. I judge whether, so in a sense of saying you never judge your mother, I'm like, how do I even know she's my mother then?
You can't morally judge your mother.
I mean, look, when it comes down to it, the 10 Commandments are the 10 Commandments, and one of them is to have a respect for your mother and father. And there's a reason why that is so fundamental as to be in the 10 Commandments, right? And
Is it a reason or is it the reason?
what do you mean?
Is it the a reason or the reason that it's in the 10 Commandments?
Say a little more.
I don't think there's only one reason
Okay.
why anything is.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to make sure you weren't reducing it to a reason that is knowable to you.
No.
Okay.
But the fact is that from what I have seen, and I'm very much at the beginning of my career. I've only dealt with a few tens of people. Even from what I have seen, far more times has it been a problem that people are unwilling to recognize the humanity of their parents and to get past the bad behavior or judgments of their parents than the opposite.
It's harder for them to get past the bad judgments of their parents than the opposite.
Yes, I think Gage has seen it as well.
Who cares? Who cares about their bad judgments?
It destroys people's lives to internalize bad judgment. If your mother told you you are a failure and you internalize that, you will live it out. And people do, including people in the homeless shelters that I deal with.
I have fallen into that trap in times and ways, yeah.
I just want to try to flesh out what Ethan is saying. Like, I know this is an extreme example, but I think it'll get to the point. Like, a child is like left in the basement, barely given enough food and water their whole life to survive by the mother. Later on, somehow this child escapes, grows up, learns to kind of function in the world. But the mother's not wrong. What does it mean that the mother's not wrong?
I hate these stupid hypothetical situations because it's sneaking you into it's tricking you into a position of into an inappropriate position of suggesting or accepting the fact that your mother could be wrong, or questioning your mother.
So what would help?
Situations.
I have clients that
Mm-hmm.
could share similar situations. I mean, there's horror stories. I don't think that's a hypothetical, what Ryan just explicated.
These are things we actually, we actually see situations. I have seen several people whose mother instilled in them that they are a failure, and they spend the rest of their lives enacting that role because that is what they think their mother and oftentimes they're right, their actual mother expected of them to be a failure. And without escaping that person is going to spend the rest of their lives being a failure.
How are you measuring failure?
They're measuring failure. That person sees themselves as a failure and goes about living life in a self-destructive.
So you're blaming the failure on the mother.
Not exactly. I went out to Guitar Circle tonight for the first time in ages. I don't practice my guitar. My sister took music. I do art. I wanted to play guitar when I was in my teens, and she got me a $69 Eaton, which would be like your Walmart guitar, and it wouldn't stay in tune. I went home and reported that from the teacher, and she's like, you play on that or you don't play at all. This is like 5 decades later. Well, maybe not that far, but it's like decades later, and it still costs me emotionally every time I pick that guitar up and play for 5 minutes. And I have no logical reason why. That's an actual example that my sister and I have talked about this. And I could be blaming my mother for some things, but some of the things that I have forgotten because of some of those things, my sister remembers. And she will say, I don't know why mom X, Y, or Z. I don't know if my mom knew why she X, Y, or Z. I really don't. But that is one, like long-term, decades later, oops, sorry, you back?
Yeah.
Like that's like the decades later irritant. It's a stuck place in my life that irritates the heck out of me. Even though I don't hate my mother or don't blame my mother in a sense for something that happened like 40 years ago, that's redundant at this point. But at the same time, it's also true that there's an element of that they're trying, that is being pointed out. And me saying my mother is not at fault, you don't get to blame your mother, isn't helpful to the situation. Doesn't help her, me, or anybody around us. It just is and needs to be dealt with. And you have to say something.
Let's stop.
I lost connection there for a second, but
Yeah, sorry. I saw.
Let's stop.
Yeah, I don't like. Okay, sorry. Go ahead, good Jacob.
Let's talk actual, right? You have, I'm sure you have in Reno, just like we have in Los Angeles. You have people who are obviously dysfunctional people, like homeless people who are chronically homeless, right? These people exist, and in the places where I am interning right now, right? Our job is to help these people be able to live a different life pattern. And sometimes, not always, sometimes that is the result of their how they view their relationship with their mother. Now, like, I can have a symbolic framework saying that mothers are never wrong, but in real life, this is a person who lives their life in a state of misery and torture, which I think any of us recognizes. I mean, we've seen homeless people.
I mean, maybe in fairness to, I'm still not clear what you're trying to say, but like maybe in fairness to it, it's like there's a difference between what is real versus what's going to help you move forward. And yes, it is real that the mother sinned, but what actually is going to make progress in helping grasp the world and move forward into the world and become a healthy person, a healthy person?
The only problem with these people at the bottom, the circumstances have favored the least. The only problem in regards to their mother is if they are not honoring their mother. That's the only problem there. And if they're not honoring their mother, that's what should be fixed. And everything else, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what their circumstances are. Suffering is inconsequential.
Is this part of a religious belief that suffering, in a sense, performs good? Or in what sense are you saying that?
It either performs good or is inconsequential. It doesn't matter.
You're approaching this from a very a priori, like it's not pragmatic and functional at all.
Pragmatic in regards to what?
In regards to, okay, there are certain things and ways in which we can treat people who are homeless, and 6 months down the line, see what the result is in their lives.
Okay,
right?
Sure. There's nothing wrong with that.
Okay, so
as long as you're not blaming the mother.
So
why as long as?
Because blaming the mother is wrong.
Why?
Because God told you.
He did?
Mm-hmm.
When?
On Mount Sinai.
Except for the fact you have so many stories in the Bible where the mother is a bad mother.
Yeah, from the narrative perspective, but not from the perspective of the child.
What do you mean? Esau definitely like saw Rebecca as not a good mother. Like this, I mean, the Bible itself includes many stories of bad mothers.
Was that before Sinai or after Sinai?
I am sure there are stories. In fact, there are more stories of bad mothers after Sinai than before Sinai.
From whose perspective?
What do you mean? Like
The Bible's.
The Bible very clearly describes bad mothers. Hosea famously, right? Like his wife is the worst of mothers.
Maybe this will help. Your mother is never wrong.
There are stories I would tell if we were not online about.
Then shame on you.
Exactly the point.
That would be my response. Is shame on you.
But so Jacob, there's something here about like, why is it that you're not willing to say that on stream?
I don't want him to.
That's a good reaction. Like, it's good that you shouldn't want to do that publicly.
Because it shouldn't. It's not something that should be said publicly. That's his own. That's his own thing. That I mean.
Look, and
what does that mean exactly?
My mom would agree with this. My mom herself would agree with this if she was here. There were times when the both of us realized that she was a young mother in a very horrible situation, and me not realizing that, and my sister not realizing that, and my mom herself not realizing that, was the cause of suffering for all of us. And being able to recognize and accept that, like my mom now is not the same person she was 20 years ago at all, in any way, right? And who she is now is a much better mother. Now, if I could not accept that, my mother now is a better mother than my mother 20 years ago or 30 years ago or 40 years ago, then that would be worse than anything about recognizing the faults of my mother, which I
it's not. It's not a. What would you say? It's not a binary thing. It's not your mother's not placed on a. What do you call it? On a graph. She's not placed on a graph where there's. I don't. The term's lost to me. Where there's negative and positive numbers. That's not how she's regarded. There's more. Like, you certainly can say that she's a better mother, but you're not.
She's not unidimensional. She's not just one measurement of one thing. She's a multiplicity of all kinds of things, right?
Yeah.
Which is part of the reason why, I mean, ultimately, I think you're very wrong when you say the mother is never wrong. I think you're saying something important.
I think you're assuming an objectivity to the mother.
There is some objectivity. I mean, this is why Vervaeke talks about the transjective. We keep on talking about objective versus subjective. And the fact is...
Well, I think that's Ethan's point. Like, earlier we talked about, like, it exists in the relationship. Like, whatever we're beefing about is not in me or in the mother. It's in our interactions. And in each of those interactions, there's an uncountable amount of stuff. And if I'm going to choose to fixate on certain things and not other things, like, that means something. Is that part of what you're getting at, Ethan, or is that
maybe? I don't even know if I like transjective because it's still the same framing, which is inappropriate. It's just a sum of the two opposites. It's like somewhere in the middle.
So on Mount Sinai,
it's placing it's still it's still placing it within somewhere that you can contain it. Like,
Really?
Transjective is not the medium.
No.
By the way, before I forget, how's the baby?
he's great.
You should send baby pictures.
I sent you a card for Christmas. Did you get it?
It must be somewhere. You did you send it to my house or to my office?
I sent it to the address you gave me.
When did I give you an address? Let me check. You sent it. Yes. Okay. Then I must have gotten it, but why did I? Huh?
So, okay, I like what you're just getting at, I think, Ethan, with like, there's this sense that like, if we're trying to act like we can fully know everything, like in some sense, me trying to psychoanalyze what my mom did to me is an attempt to have a view from nowhere where I see it all perfectly and objectively, and that's not possible, right? I think I can agree with that. I think it's still a little too dramatic to then conclude that I can't acknowledge fault where there was fault. But I can also accept that maybe there's not as much value in doing that as we want to pretend in this current cultural moment.
I don't know. I'm probably just a broken record at this point. Your mother doesn't answer to you because she's your mother. Your father also doesn't answer to you either. They answer to someone else. They may answer to their own parents or someone else that's above them.
And so
but they'll never answer to you.
Are we attempting to get someone else to repent? And if that's what someone's going to therapy for, then they need to shift their perspective, right? If someone is going to therapy attempting to resolve whatever, anxiety, or get a better grip on the world, however you want to frame it, then like that may require them to acknowledge their perception of their mother, which, you may say, okay, that's not the same as the mother, right? And the mother doesn't answer to that. I can get on board with you to an extent with all that stuff, but like helping someone get a better grip on the world, helping someone to repent requires them to acknowledge what's going on. Like if someone tries to repent without doing that, it just doesn't work.
Yeah, part of getting that grip on the world does not involve inappropriately judging your mother. Or we'll just put it this way: it doesn't involve inappropriately implicating your mother in your own sin.
But let's say
or your own suffering. That. I mean, your suffering may be your suffering may seem arbitrary, and your suffering could be a consequence of something that's completely beyond your control. And if you're going to blame that on your mother, you're evil.
Let's say you're already doing
You might as well blame it on God.
But like let's say you're already doing that, but because maybe you even share this feeling that it's wrong, and so rather than actually making the transformation in yourself to actually no longer feel that way, you just keep suppressing it. Like you have to live in the sin before you can repent of the sin. I think that's partly what you're getting at, Ryan. Like if you don't live in the sin, then you can't repent of it by definition.
What is the sin if you're not living in the sin? How are you sinning if you are not living on it?
Well, you have to acknowledge. There has to be a deep acknowledgement of how the sin is separating you from God. And so when we're talking about this in the context of,
hold on a second. Forgive me. Psychologists are
Jacob, maybe you can correct me here, and maybe I'm mistaken here, but they are completely unconcerned with sin.
Well, that's actually what we talked about for a lot. Is psychologists should be unconcerned with sin
Why?
because that's what the priests should be dealing with. The problem our society has is we have replaced our priests with these secular priest psychologists, and that's idolatry. That's not the place of a counselor to be your pastor. And that replacement is precisely what, like, so the shelter, one of the shelters I work at is a convent, and there's an actual chapel downstairs, and this convent used to be peopled with nuns, and there are no more nuns there. Now they've hired a bunch of mental health professionals, right? And you can hire 3 times as many mental health professionals as nuns, and you have to like hire at least 4 mental health professionals for each nun, because the nun was living there 24/7, right? And like we all go home, right? And you still will not replace that nun, because the nun, while she may have had skills, and many of them did go get degrees and stuff and get counseling skills, right? They were a moral authority at that place. And no matter how many psychologists you hire, not one of us can go say mass at that chapel downstairs.
Wait, okay. Are you going to say that the increase in psychologists and the decrease in nuns is completely unrelated? Those two things are completely unrelated to each other?
Oh no, they're very related. Our society is trying to replace nuns with psychologists.
Okay.
And that's like trying to replace your gasoline in your car with water.
Right. Okay, exactly. So I don't understand how you need to explain to me how these two things can coexist then.
What do you mean?
Gasoline and water in your gas tank.
Your gas tank should not have gasoline and water. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't put water in the water tank of your car. Your car has water in it. It's just not in the gas tank. And putting the water in the gas tank is a very, very bad idea. And that's what we're doing. We're trying to replace the nuns and the priests with psychologists, and that's just idiotic beyond belief.
So
what's
your
causing
point
that?
Is that like psychology has a place in its proper place.
Yes.
It sounds like Ethan's saying, like, why are we even bothering with psychology at all?
We're bothering with psychology partially because people like, okay, for the billionth time, when I was starting Fountain of Comfort, I went and spoke to 2 people. I went and spoke to my rabbi, and I went and spoke to Mother Markella at it's called a monastery, but that's because the Greek Orthodox call they're called monasteries whether they're filled with nuns or with monks. And so she's the abbess of a bunch of nuns in Dunlap, California. And I went and spoke to my rabbi, and he told me, no, like, a counselor is not a spiritual guide. You can't make that mistake. And then I went and spoke to Mother Markella, and she said the exact same thing. I never expected a Greek Orthodox nun to sound like a Hasidic rabbi, but like they both said the exact same thing, right? Which was, and this is how Mother Markella put it. She said, if somebody has a psychological problem and they come to me, I can pray for them, but I can't fix that any more than if they have cancer. Like, if you have cancer, you need to go to an oncologist. If you have a mental health issue, you need to go to a psychologist. But
how do you parse these things apart though? Like if someone has a mental health issue because of their sin, and they're sinning in that way, we could choose to talk about the past or not. Like, they're not separated things, which sounds like it's part of Ethan's point. It's like,
and he's right.
You can't act like these are like discrete categories, which modernity loves to do. It's like, I'm gonna isolate, I'm gonna segment my life, and I'm gonna put my psychological issues over here. I'm gonna put my sin issues over here. It's like, that's the wrong.
It's the podiatrist problem. It's the podiatrist problem, right? So there's something wrong with your foot, and you're like, chop off the foot, send it to the podiatrist. And it's like, no, that's not how it works, right? So at the convent, there should be nuns. That doesn't mean we can't have psychologists. That doesn't mean we can't have mental health professionals. That does mean the nuns have to be there. The nuns have to be there. You cannot get rid of the spiritual leadership. Theology is the queen of all sciences. And the top of the hierarchy always has to be God. And so there must always be priests, whether it's in a hospital or, the way my rabbi put it, is like a religious plumber doesn't start a synagogue that has a plumbing service. He starts a plumbing business that is guided by his belief in God, his religious ethics, by being a religious person who's also a plumber, right? And like, you always need religion at the top of the hierarchy. It doesn't matter if you're a plumber or you're a podiatrist or you're a truck driver, right? A truck driver still needs to realize God is the reason why he's doing whatever he's doing, right? But that doesn't mean you ask a priest like how to fix your car, like that, or your plumbing, or your anything, or including psychology. Like, there is a science of psychology. There exists a science of psychology that cannot replace theology, which is precisely what we're trying to do, which is insane.
While you're all thinking, I must say good night. It's almost midnight.
Good night.
Good night. Well, I'm not going to speak for everyone. I was going to say nobody has a problem with hierarchy, Jacob.
I certainly don't.
I don't think that you can have a problem with hierarchy. It's inevitable, and it's just, well, we know the lobsters, right? There's no getting around it.
Yeah.
Hierarchy. I mean, I say that hierarchy is a gift from God. I don't think it's a question of hierarchy and where the position that something occupies within hierarchy. I think it's a question of evil. I'm failing to see
being placed in the wrong place in the hierarchy is evil.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm with you 100% on the psychologists replacing the nuns and the priests. Of course, yeah, I'm definitely that we can both agree on is evil. I can't see any place in the hierarchy for psychology.
Do you see any place in the hierarchy for plumbers?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, why do you see for plumbers but not psychologists?
What is the purpose of psychology?
The purpose of psychology is to study the dysfunction of human behavior.
Why is that not the concern of a priest or a spiritual father?
It is the concern of also, but there are things, psychological problems which are not spiritual. There are psychological problems which are not based in your spiritual problems. Your
What exactly do you mean by that, Jacob? Because, like, you know, if we're talking about something like schizophrenia or bipolar or like a number of these things, I mean, it seems like a lot of them are related to this. Like, they could be framed in spiritual ways, right?
Well, everything can be. Look, the fact that my plumbing is not being maintained is also a spiritual problem. Like, if you don't do the maintenance on your house, that is a spiritual problem, right? If your house is ugly, that is a spiritual problem, right? Because you are not bothering with the aesthetics. Like, these are all related. And at the Lord of Spirits conference, like, this was what Father Stephen and Father Damick both were talking about.
You went to that?
Yeah.
When was it?
It was a few months ago.
That's funny that you went to that. I didn't even know.
Yeah.
I just, I don't know why. I don't know. It's just funny. What are you doing with those people?
Father Stephen invited me to go.
Oh, good. I didn't even know that they had a conference.
Yeah, they called it LoserCon. It was hilarious. I did a few.
That's actually what they were calling it. That's really funny.
Lord of Spirits conference, yes,
Right.
LoserCon. I did a few live streams from there, including one with Prophet Zacharias.
Oh yeah, y'all talked about memes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
For a little bit. No, I mean, one of the things they talked about, and this was on the Q&A they released, was somebody was asking about spiritual problems versus psychological problems. And
Interesting.
Father Stephen said, these three things are related: spiritual, psychological, and physical, right? If you have a physical problem, that is going to affect your psyche, and it's going to affect your spirituality. And if you have a psychic problem, like psychological problem, it's going to affect you physically and spiritually. And if you have a spiritual problem, it's going to affect you physically and psychologically, right? These are not distinct things that are completely separate from each other. They are interrelated.
It seems like there's a misappropriation here, that psychology is attempting to make things material that are spiritual in nature.
I don't think psychology is trying to do it. I think our society, in trying to be secular, we've identified religious thinking as, some people think of it as a mental illness. Like, the new atheists actually called religiosity mental illness, right? And it's like, okay, now you're completely like placing things in a very absurd way, right? And we got to a place where we were like, no, there's nobody who has demons that need to be exorcised. There's no role for an exorcist at all, right? Everybody should go to a psychologist. And that's idiotic. Some people need to be exorcised of their demons. It's funny. I went down to the chapel today. Nobody ever goes there, but I decided to go and take a look. And there was this jar of holy water, and it says holy water, right?
Is this an Orthodox chapel?
No, it's Catholic.
A Catholic?
Yeah, but there hasn't been a priest there in like over a year, and the nuns are barely ever come. Like there's 2 retired nuns that every once in a while come and visit just to say hi, right? There used to be 200 nuns at this convent. There are 0 nuns left. And there was just like this thing of holy water and a small fridge with wafers and wine in it that obviously they haven't had services there at least since last Easter, right? And it was like I just looked at that holy water and I was like, it's just sitting there, right? And frankly, the people in the shelter need it. Like, we have a real Satan problem at that shelter. We really, like, I'm not even joking. We have a real Satan problem. Like, I keep on saying to the staff, is there any way we can get a priest or a nun here? And it's like, the Catholic Church doesn't have any priests or nuns available. Like, there are not enough priests or nuns around for them to send somebody, you know? And it's like, you can't blame the professional staff there. You can't blame the fact that lots of people are throwing money at this shelter, and they are, for the fact there's no priests. Find me a priest. There's a chapel sitting there waiting for him to come say mass. Find me an effing priest. I can't buy a priest for that chapel. And you can't blame the psychologist for it. It's not the psychologist's fault. There's no priest or nun in that entire place where there used to be 200 nuns.
Can you remind me what you said in the purpose of psychology?
What? Say that again?
Remind me what you said when I asked you what the purpose of psychology is.
To reintegrate people into society.
I can't accept that as a reliable metric.
You're right, and that's why I brought up Foucault, right?
You have to explain that to me.
Okay, so part of Foucault's whole, so he argued that psychology is how society marginalizes the people they don't like, right? He thought it was all power games, and like calling something a psychological disease was how the people who were in power maintained their power by calling the people who they didn't like mentally ill.
Which that happens. That happens every single day. It's like it's not a gun crisis; it's a mental health crisis, and vice versa. And I mean, political vice versa. Each side has their own thing that they attribute all problems to mental illness.
Right. So when I say that psychology is there to reintegrate people into society, if that society is not properly oriented, which religion orients society, not psychologists. Psychology orients people to the society. Religion orients society. If the society is dysfunctional,
You're right. It's like the evolutionary biologists that are trying to orient society.
Yeah, Yes, exactly. The Gnostic, Brett Weinstein type biologists who are like, we are going to, what you call it? We are going to bypass our biology. It's like you believe biology is all that there is.
Yeah,
Bypass
you
it.
don't have to convince me on Brett Weinstein. Did you see I have it clipped on my I think I have it clipped on my YouTube. The interview that they did with Bishop Barron.
I did watch that.
It was I don't even think Bishop Barron meant to do it, but he caught them in that exact thing right there, and it was so awkward that he like was forcibly changed the subject because it was so embarrassing.
Yeah, they were. I mean, once Sam pointed out the Gnosticism of it, it was just so obvious.
Sam
Titterman, the new Unitarian.
Oh, Sam Adams, the Unitarian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, now he goes by his real name, Titterman.
Oh.
Yeah, he's no longer in hiding ever since he got kicked out of his latest Trinitarian. But yeah, I mean, part of my whole thing with Fountain of Comfort is I want to restore psychology to being a handmaiden of the queen, which is theology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm really intrigued by this whole thing. I'm glad you're bringing this up, Ethan, because it's like, I think even Gage mentioned earlier, like when you become a counselor, you can kind of go down two different roads, like the clinical or the more like in Christian evangelical land, it would be like biblical counseling, which is more of just like, hey, see everything primarily as a spiritual problem. Psychology is a bunch of bullshit. And it's like, I'm still trying to think through how I conceptualize these things. And I'd be curious to hear your thoughts, Gage. Like, why did you go down the clinical route, knowing this tension?
Yeah, I mean, the field of psychology and psychiatry's, 200 years old at most.
Mm-hmm.
And so everything that we're talking about, like, you just always have to remember is within this certain frame of an issue that happened long before this. And so I don't, I'm taking classes and most of the stuff like is just ridiculous. You know what I mean? Like it's at every level. Like I mean that obviously as far as like the woke stuff is concerned, but I also mean it as far as like the diagnostic criteria system is
Yeah.
laughable. I can't even believe it. um, but like so much of the modern world is that to me. like I'm constantly wading through the BS of systems that have replaced sensible, you know. I guess to go to your question, Ryan. Like one thing for me is like I I see this as such a
You hiccuped, Gage. Yeah.
What's
This is
that?
what happens when you get up and okay, you're back.
Okay.
You lost for a second.
Sorry, I had to, no, I was just saying that like the issue of modernity is obviously immense, and so we have this opportunity where this field, however ridiculous it is, has emerged that plays a very interesting role in. I mean, I meet with clients for 60 minutes and I have a very intimate conversation with them that is, unlike any conversations they have in their life with anybody that they know. And there's something deeply like horrific about that. Because I feel like I'm playing a very intimate role. And so I totally understand what you mean. Like part of this conversation has been about like this weird aspect where we play priests, and I'm very uncomfortable with that, and that's why I'm glad this conversation is being had. But at the same time, you know, through these conversations, rather than seeing like my position as like some sort of a surrogate priest, but rather seeing it as like every other role fails here, and that's partly what's so confusing about this. But part of it is being like a older sibling is an analogy that comes to mind. And Catherine Wilson, explains it as being a parent. um and so there's this role you play, and it it is disgusting in some sense because of how it's so disconnected from the way the world manifests, right, properly. But I also feel like there's a moment, and I've been able to connect with people in a significant way, and I've been able to use this hollowed out system to do what I believe to be actually effective work. Um, not maybe effective as far as like, dealing with people's sins the way a priest would. I also can't be people's parents. I can't be their siblings. But some ground was seeded because of modernity, and I'm not. eh, There seemed like an opportunity here. Part of it is I struggle. This is also an existential thing for me. I struggle to understand my role in society, in a world where the religious structures that seem to make sense hundreds of years ago don't make sense to me as much anymore. The way society lays itself out in modernity is confusing to me. The fact that I have to like pick a career in this like modern sense, all of this stuff feels so foreign to me. And so like I more understand things as like, okay, what are the things that are about me? Like what's my teleological end? What's the thing that I was created for? And I can't directly change the landscape that I'm in. And although it does, I don't feel like that translates as well as it maybe used to. This is where I've found myself, and I don't hold a tight grip on it, if that makes any sense. And that's kind
Yeah.
of what I appreciate about the conversations that you've fostered about this, Jacob, is that it's like we're not I don't even know how I feel about psychology, but psychology is the zeitgeist in which the conversations I'm interested in having in people is where the modern world is at. And I feel called to be where the modern world is at, even if I don't understand it exactly. Sorry, that was kind of a ramble of thoughts, but I just wanted to kind of lay out
No,
where
I
I'm at with
think that
that.
makes sense. I think I'm in a similar spot where for me, this is just very pragmatic. It's like, yeah, I mean, this is where it's happening. I don't necessarily agree with it, but it's where it's happening. So like,
Right.
let's see what that's about, you know?
Right. It's I mean, getting to that aspect about like something can something happens where you can operate in a system that maybe isn't ideal, but it
Right.
can but working in that system can open up people to pursuing it in the ideal way. And so when we're like, using this analogy of that we were talking about with the mother, it's like we can
Yeah.
talk about you can not honor your mother to honor your mother. There's something about and there's a way in which we have to this would open up a whole nother conversation, but there's a way in which the opposites of things help to encourage, like if you get if you go to the bottom of one thing, you spring up to the opposite thing.
Well, can I give you maybe an example of that in my own life? It's like I ended up here because I've been on this whole journey of like having this really intense like physical pain and a bunch of emotional issues and stuff that I was just kind of swimming in for years. And it's like I eventually decided to mostly fixate on the physical stuff and to like resolve that, which kind of led its way into like realizing like, oh, like all these I kind of started like doing all this like mental work, you know, psychotherapizing myself or whatever, which is not very healthy, you know, but like that's where I was at the time.
Right.
But lately, as I've gotten like pretty much to the end of all this physical pain, what I'm finding is that it's directly correlated with my unforgiveness. And I mean that quite literally. Like I was sitting in the chair back there with a friend and we were talking the other day, and like once I emotionally realized that I was willing to forgive someone and said that out loud, it was like my back literally, like some of it loosened up, you know?
Right.
And contra-wise, sometimes if I am like really like trying to force this stuff to release, I eventually can get it. But then about for the next sometimes 4 hours, sometimes 24 hours, I get lost in all those unprocessed feelings of unforgiveness, right? And so it's like it's sort of both and you could frame that as like, well, maybe the proper thing for me to do this whole time should have been forgive, and then maybe that would have just initiated all the back stuff to release, you know? And so maybe in some sense I went about it the wrong way. I went about it backwards, you know?
Right.
But by pursuing it backwards, I ended up kind of inverting the whole thing and realizing like, oh wait, this isn't what I thought it was. It's I've actually been seeing it upside down.
Right.
You know?
Right.
But at the same time, it got me there. So like, praise God, you know, as far as I'm concerned. So I don't know. I think there's a difference between the ideal and how things actually play out in reality.
Yeah, right. I agree with that. And I think it seems like the counseling space is an arena for that very thing you're talking about. And I feel like, you know, the interactions that I've had with clients have shown that, you know, regardless of the whole mental health industry and all of the problems that I have with it, at the end of the day, it's like I sit down with someone and they talk, and something they're able to, you know, hear them. I mean, like a good therapist doesn't intervene too much with any of the psychology anyway. Do you know what I mean? And so like I'm not, you know, like I'm not doing psychology actually at all, right? I'm listening to people because they're human beings who I love, and in the way that's appropriate in that dynamic. And so like to me the psychology is like the Trojan horse in some sense into having experiences with people that for some reason would be inappropriate otherwise, because people and again the reasons for that are infinite, why we can't have open conversations. But like I don't buy into this whole mental health, all of the type of propaganda you hear about it. I very much am concerned with being a part of making sense of where most people are looking for issues that, like you said, the relationships between body, mind, and soul in this are so intricate. And I like the idea of providing a problem space for people to explore that, and to not try and come in and give them psychological answers, but rather explore the complexities of what it means to be a human person. And my hope in some sense is through modeling that gives them a sense of thinking outside of just the mental health sphere about their life. And hopefully that reconnects them with things that I think are more important.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with counseling. It's just the psychotherapy that's the bug here.
How do
Counseling is good.
Counseling and psychotherapy.
What's that?
How do you distinguish between counseling and psychotherapy?
The psychotherapy is a particular science or a particular method that blames everything on the mother.
Oh man, okay. Sorry. I wish I had known that was your position this whole time. Because yeah, I think psychotherapy is a bunch of crap too. as a counselor, I have no intention of entertaining classical psychotherapy. You know, as Freud designed it.
Psychotherapy is an attempt to offer forgiveness. I didn't come up with this. I heard this, and it's absolutely right. I think psychotherapy is attempts to offer forgiveness without repentance, redemption without repentance. So it's like, hey, I have something wrong with there's something wrong. There's I'm suffering depravity, some sort of deprivation, and in order, I need reconciliation, but I'm not willing to repent. Or
right, it's trying to cheat the system in some sense.
Exactly. It's not that complicated. I mean, that's evil.
Okay, I have to say, I mean, for me, a big part of this is that the economic system, the incentivization that we have is you go to the therapist you like and you give money to the person you like to talk to, right? Mm-hmm. And as Peterson constantly says, the good therapist is the one who tells you the things you don't want to hear. So why am I paying someone to tell me things I don't want to hear? Right? And like if you are mature enough, you are willing to pay people to tell you things you don't want to hear. But in fact, that's not most of the people who need psychotherapy. So that's why I think like the entire economics system around psychotherapy has led to the industry we see, which is completely backwards and effed up. Which is part of my whole thing with Fountain of Comfort. Like, I think the last person who should pay for psychotherapy is the person who needs it.
And it's almost as if people shouldn't be choosing their own psychotherapist.
They should not.
Like people shouldn't be choosing their own priest.
Correct. Yes. 100%.
I'm failing to see how these two things aren't at odds with each other.
What do you mean?
A psychotherapist and a priest.
A psychotherapist, like everything else in the world, has to be subjugated to the priest.
Yeah, but I think it's also important to distinguish that when some people mean psychotherapist, they just mean counselor. And
maybe
when some no, but that's
psychology is a particular practice, a particular science.
Yes, but it's also you can't get people in the field to agree on particularly what I mean, we talked earlier about what the goal of psychology is. It's not clear to me that could be agreed upon by, we get a group of professionals in the field to come together. I doubt they would agree on what
Here's my problem with psychotherapy, psychology, psychiatry, whatever. It's based on something that's measurable. It judges the well-being of a person based off of something that's measurable.
Yeah, but it doesn't have to be like part of what I was saying about how I think how the DSM is ridiculous is I reject exactly what you're saying. Like I reject the ability to measure a person's psyche and the complexities of their behavioral health, to use their terms. Like, I'm not defending the field. I guess what I'm defending rather is like the move to quantify is something that happens everywhere. That's part of modernity. Everything is being quantified in an extremely problematic way. I mean, we're in the reign of quantity. And so like the fact that that I think people make a bigger deal about it in the field of psychology because there's this like weird thing where nobody knows what to do with psychology because it's like
Well, it's a replacement for wisdom. We think that if we can label something as a discrete thing, I can say, "Oh, that's what it is," and now I have control over it. Now I have hope, right? Whereas my understanding, at least, is that all these terms were originally just intended to be a shared language. It wasn't necessarily supposed to be much more than that. It was just, hey, how can we help professionals talk to each other about what we're seeing? But it's grown from there to become whatever it is today, which is this, kind of monstrous, highly discrete, quantitative thing, which it still has some value. I'm not rejecting the value of it, but it's like, if that's your primary frame and you're thinking that, oh, once I have the label and the diagnosis, then now, somehow I will ride off into the sunset. It's just like, that's not how it works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I just think, there's aspects of trying to quantify everything in what we participate in. And so, like, psychology to me is just like the move towards psychology was just inevitable given the philosophical movement of the West. Like, there had to be something like psychology that emerged in the collapse of being able to think about the whole understanding of body, mind, and spirit absolutely collapsed. And so psychology is partly an attempt to try and it I believe it fails ultimately, but it does try to make sense of all of these different spheres and the ramifications it's had as far as, I mean, there's different strands of it as far as psychiatry, and then the way in which it manifests itself as far as like actual studies, and then you have the kind of neuroscientist aspect of it. Um, I- I mean, it's like when hearing Vervaeke talk in the way that he does, I mean, Vervaeke talks about things that then I go and listen to someone else who uses completely different language that to me I can extract out the pattern of them being nearly identical. But like some people will just be like, well, that's just a completely different thing. And in some sense they're right. In another sense, like seeing the similarity is right. It's a part of this like modal confusion that we find ourselves in where we're oftentimes talking about the same thing, but it is also important to remember that the language is different for reasons. I don't know that we need to necessarily collapse it as an either or.
We're confused. I mean,
Right.
that is what I got from the Twitter interchange with Ethan. Was I could see Ethan was talking about important things, and I think it was very clear to me that we agreed more than we disagreed. Although the way he was wording it was completely like, no, I would, if those were empty words that were not coming out of the Ethan that I know, I would have just rejected them as stupidity. And somebody actually did. Like one of the guys was like, "This guy must be just trolling because that's why." And I'm like, "No, he's my
But
friend."
it served its purpose, right? We're talking about it, And I was all pissy at first. Now I'm listening. I'm like, okay, all right. I hear where you're coming from.
No, I mean, and the confusion comes from the fact that our society at large is confused.
Right.
These are important things that we need to be aligned in our understanding of.
Okay. You've said a lot of things here, Jacob, that like made me feel a lot better. Hearing them come from you. The hierarchy stuff and the inappropriation or the inappropriate place. What's that?
Did you have any doubts that I'm a religious person, Ethan? Like,
well, when you started studying psychology, I did.
Yeah, you really. Come on.
I mean, there was a little question there. I was like, what's he doing? But okay, really, okay. I think that it all comes down to this. I think psychology I think it misdiagnoses spiritual problems as material problems. I don't think we're ever going to get past that. I think that's really what it all comes down to. And the reason that it's overwhelmed everything is because we live in a materialistic culture, and we have a science that claims to have an answer to all of these spiritual problems, but provides it in a materialistic provides a materialistic answer for all of these spiritual problems. I think that's why all of these nuns have been replaced by psychologists.
These nuns have been replaced by psychologists because there are no nuns. There was a vacuum where
Like the nuns were replaced by nothing, and the nothing is being filled with psychology.
Yeah, there was theology. Then there was a vacuum where theology needed to be, and then there was people trying to fill that vacuum, and much of that was an attempt to fill it with psychology, which again is like, hey, water is good in my radiator. Why don't I try it in my gas tank?
Maybe. I mean,
Yeah.
We're splitting hairs. Okay. I mean, I keep asking this. Like, how does psychology measure its success? How does psychotherapy measure its success?
Well, okay. As much as Gage doesn't like the DSM, I actually do like the DSM because it does have actual like criteria for whether or not you qualify as having a dysfunction. And frankly, it has been perverted. I have to admit that. But there are things which are obviously dysfunctional, right? Like you can go down the symptoms and be like, if somebody has these symptoms, right? There is something wrong there that in the field of psychology, you see that this is a repetitive pattern that people who have certain problems, it correlates with other problems, and you can discern a pattern there which can be helped in various ways.
Right? There's just these other problems that there's this delusion or this assumption that there's a baseline normal human being, and when you fall outside of this normative thing that's considered a human being, there must be something wrong with you, and we got to get you back into the middle, or we must have an explanation for why you're not a normal human being.
Hold on. Okay, see, many times I find you actually reiterating postmodern points, which I think it's not like the postmodernists have no.
How do you know it's not? How do you know that it's postmodern and not just non-modern?
Because before modernity, we had no problem with saying there is such a thing as an ideal normal human being. There is a norm of humanity. There is a masculine.
I never said that there's not an ideal human being and that everything is relative. I'm not arguing that at all. I think that's just as evil.
So there is normal and there's abnormal. And some things are diagnosably abnormal.
I gotta go,
Maybe,
guys.
but good night, Gage. Maybe, but according to who? Who does? I mean,
according to God. That's the thing.
Exactly.
Yes, theology needs to be the guide. Like, I mean, for me, it keeps on going back to the plumbing thing, right? Like a plumber cannot tell you like the design of a building, whether it's beautiful or not, is not the plumber. The plumber doesn't decide if something is beautiful, right? He simply tells you whether it like the plumbing works and what works, right? Water coming out from some pipes is a good thing, and water not coming out of other pipes is a good thing, and that's not up to the plumber, right? These are and it goes okay. Let's go
Yeah,
back.
I mean, it's like the norm or the healthy person. It's not a status in some sense. It's an ability to engage properly with the world, and the properly is, I mean, that's where the whole meat of the conversation is, right? It's the what are you aiming at? What's your telos? What is your vision for how you are engaging? It's not just a thing that's in my head, right? It's not like I fixed the stuff that's in my head and now I have the status of being healthy. The healthy status exists in the ability to properly engage. Something like that, right?
Yeah, and what is healthy, what is good, right? So you may have heard of this. There's such thing as deaf culture, right? So there's there's sign language, there's a whole culture of being deaf. So there were parents who wanted their kids to be deaf to the point where they went and asked the doctor, "We want to make sure our kids are deaf."
Wow. Okay.
Okay, and you can go read up on the questions, and the doctors were like, "Well, yeah, obviously we could make your kids deaf. Is that ethical?" And obviously the answer should be no, but that's not an answer the doctor can give you, right? That's not the doctor can't, and that's not the doctor's job. Doctors don't define healthy.
Well, and I mean, but the same thing that applies to the counseling world, right? Because it's like if someone comes to me and they're like, "I want to be better." Well, okay, what do you mean by better? Like, what are we aiming at here, and why? And I mean, this is a real, honestly, a concern of mine going to the counseling thing, because it's like, okay, if someone comes in and their life is overrun by anxiety, it's like, yeah, let's figure out what's going on there, you know? But there's other things that's more subtle. It's like, I'm just anticipating there's going to be real questions about, is what they're aiming at something I want to help them aim at, you know? And I think sometimes the honest answer to that is me no, right? But my code of ethics says it's not for me to decide, right? Whatever the person, well, I don't know. I lose the thread when I try to talk about this. It's like kind of at the edge of my thinking, but it's like, yeah, I mean, this is a real problem. And it seems like the whole industry is kind of just trying to like kick the can down the road or just avoid it or just pretend like, well, let's just axiomatically say you must pursue wellness for the client. Okay, like I agree with that, sure, but like what do we mean by wellness? No one attempts to define it anymore.
Exactly.
Because it's not the domain of counseling, it's the domain of philosophy and ethics and religion and
Right.
the stuff that we've rejected.
The stuff that has disappeared.
Yeah.
And that's
They haven't.
the problem. It's not psychology's problem that theology has disappeared from our public life.
I'm not going to argue with you on that. I mean, who knows? Okay.
This is on the
Sorry,
verge
I'll
of.
leave it now, but I'm enjoying this.
Okay, yeah, I gotta go here soon, but this is maybe I'll end it here. This is probably on the verge of my capacity to think here. Okay, maybe there are such things as material defects, but how would I know what they are? How would anyone know what they are? Other than God. And if they're only known to God, it almost makes them irrelevant.
Okay, so but you do believe in revelation.
Yes, sure.
Okay. So God has revealed, and that is where we have to have the ideal, which is revealed by God, right? And then we can orient ourselves towards that.
Okay, let me put it this way: maybe there are material defects in a human being that are a consequence beyond their own agency.
Yeah.
Whether those are defects or deprivations is inconsequential. We might differ on this like significantly.
I understand what you mean. If somebody is deaf, it's better to help them hear.
Maybe.
What do you mean maybe? You don't
You're
believe
assuming,
that it's better
you're assuming that the deafness is bad.
Yes, I am.
Which maybe it is. Okay. Just let me
something as good and better, and yes, the good exists. It's real.
Let me get through this slowly. Okay, there may be such thing as some form of what seems to us arbitrary material deprivation, meaning that there's some form of deprivation that's a consequence of something beyond our own agency. That's not a problem. I don't see that as a problem because well, I've probably lost it, but I might botch this, but it has something to do with the fall, because we live in a fallen world, and we have all of these consequences of a fallen world. And there's nothing we can do about them.
There's nothing we can do about them?
There's nothing you can do about the fact that you die. I mean, that's the biggest spiritual excuse me. That's the biggest material deprivation that there is death.
Okay, I mean, so now we're getting. I mean, these are deep theological questions, and I don't want to be overly dismissive of what I call theological nihilism, right? Which
you don't want to mock Christians.
Well, Calvinists mostly. We have like Deuteronomy 30, right? God has placed before us life and death, and he commands us to choose life, right? And that capacity to choose is a gift, yes, but it is a capacity which he has given us, and he has commanded us to actually do. There is a kingdom of God which he has given us a capacity to help bring into the world. That is why we pray, thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven, right? There is a kingdom of heaven, and we live on the kingdom of earth, and our job is to help usher in the kingdom of heaven onto this earth.
Yeah.
Um, but there's something about this. I don't like calling it arbitrary deprivation or arbitrary suffering because that's putting a negative kind of.
There's no such thing as unnecessary suffering because ultimately all things that exist because God created them.
Yeah,
At the same time, like all evil exists for the purpose of the good, but that does not make evil good.
Okay, Mark says struggle is not arbitrary nor is suffering. Of course, there is unnecessary suffering. It's something you choose from struggle over joy. No, I don't think. Okay, here's the thing. I think that if you oppose yourself to suffering, I think that's satanic.
If you what?
If you oppose yourself to suffering, if you go on a crusade against suffering, I think that's satanic. I think that's actually where this all comes from. I think that's where the psychology comes from. It's a crusade against suffering.
There definitely is a form of moral deism, like therapeutic moral deism, as Vander calls it, which is
Yeah.
which is that therapeutic moral deism is a I mean, this goes back to Halachic Man Note 4, where he says there's people who think that the purpose of life is joy and feeling like a tranquility without any suffering. And the entire book is about why it is necessary to go through the struggles of the religious man, right? Yeah, suffering is necessary and a part of life. It is.
This is part of the genius of Jordan Peterson here, and this is where he absolutely fails as a psychologist, is when he starts talking about suffering. He starts saying things like, man up and bear your cross. He doesn't say that, but I'm trying to remember. He says something about some cathedral he was in about going in a maze or something, and you end up in the middle, and the consequence, the salvation is the struggle that you went through.
That's not him failing as a psychologist. That's him as a psychologist recognizing that ultimately his goals have to be grounded in the religious. That is him admitting to his proper role as a servant.
A servant of yeah, but that doesn't mean that he's anyways, back on the suffering thing. Like, I think this psychology thing is at war with suffering. It's at odds with suffering, and what it's trying to do is it's trying to artificially undo the fallen world. It's trying to redeem the world. It's trying to take the it's hard I mean, we're getting so deep, it's hard for me not to invoke Christian. It's hard for me not to get Christian, but it's attempting to redeem the fallen world. It's trying to supplement Christ. It's trying to or maybe it's trying to supplement the law, right?
There definitely are people who are trying to. Yes, there are definitely people.
Not supplement's the wrong word. It's replace or whatever. Choose a better word, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, and I agree with your criticisms. I don't think they are inherent to what psychology can be and is when it is functioning. I don't think a functioning field of psychology is misplaced on the hierarchy. I think where psychology is now is misplaced in the hierarchy, but that's because we don't have a place for the sacred.
Well, Jacob, we agree there that it's definitely misplaced on the hierarchy. I think the burden of proof lies with you in showing that it has any place on the hierarchy. Because so far I haven't seen it anywhere, and I can't accept Jordan Peterson as an example.
Have you ever seen somebody who's mentally ill who has actually been healed through psychology?
I don't know. I don't.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know to trust it. Like,
what do you mean? Okay, so
like where would it? Like, you could put one of these prophets through a psychological program, and they would come out healed at the end of it, but they would no longer be a prophet. Was that a good thing? Or
Ethan, whether or not something is a good thing is not a question of psychology.
Okay, I'm glad that you said that.
Okay, so and that's why theologically, I am bothered by how much the priests, and frankly, it's mostly Protestant pastors, have elevated psychology.
No,
above themselves.
No, I'm just gonna say one thing. It's by no means just the Protestant pastors.
It's not just, but it
is not a majority. I wouldn't say it's a majority either.
In the United States, I mean,
try to get ordained anywhere, or Orthodox or Protestant. See what they subject you to.
Very few Orthodox Christians in the United States.
What's that?
The United States is vast majority Protestant. The United States is vast majority Protestant, and there has been a total seeding of CEDE, drawing back of their responsibility in saying what is good and what is not good. But when you come down to it, there are people who, mental health is a real thing. There's such thing as mental illness, which is real mental illness, not. I
don't. Okay. If you're, I just don't see how you can accept that if you're named as a Christian.
Why?
Because then you're assuming that there's some sort of redemption outside of Christ.
Why? What? Where did you get that connection? Somebody has cancer. Goes to a oncologist. Gets healed. Is that a redemption outside of Christ? No more oncologists. Let's close all the hospitals. Why would you make that connection?
It's just, again, we're assuming that there's problems in the soul of a human being that aren't fundamentally spiritual.
You're equating psychology with spirituality. You're saying that how a person thinks is the same thing as their spirit. You're equating a consciousness with their soul. And a consciousness and a soul are not the same thing.
I don't even think consciousness exists. I think you're going to spout a whole nother trail of memes from me on consciousness.
What do you mean?
I don't think consciousness exists either. I have serious problems about that concept. Okay. There's a whole bunch of comments here.
Yeah, Mark's comments I usually ignore.
Okay, he says, I think Catherine is right. In a healthy world, therapy is not needed because that work is done by a priest or a pastor. I mean, the thing is, it's like if you have a complaint with the priest or pastor, have a complaint with them. But don't be a psychologist as a consequence of that. Like,
Hold on. If you think that me going into counseling is a replacement for me becoming a rabbi, like that's not a thing.
okay,
That's not a thing at all. Like, there's a reason why I went for spiritual guidance about Fountain of Comfort, is because I am going into psychology, not into being a spiritual leader. My theology is set. Like, that's not I'm not becoming a theologian.
okay. Why don't you give me a psychoanalysis here? I have a terrible time splitting my attention. I'm very bad at it. I can't. I can hardly drive and talk. So I drive for a living. You know that, right?
We don't multitask. Human beings don't actually multitask.
Well, some people can do it better than others.
Mm.
So is this? What is this? Do I have some sort of psychological dilemma here, or
No, trying to pathologize,
pathology? Yeah, there you go.
Trying to pathologize, like, you're a normal functioning human being. Like, sending you to a psychologist, like, everybody needs therapy, that's just bullshit. Just like everybody needs to go to a doctor, like, maybe for a checkup, okay, but like generally most people go to a checkup and the doctor's like, you're just fine.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is this. I'm not prepared for this, but maybe I could prepare for it. But the psychotherapy, it absolutely crosses over. The thing that I'm complaining about crosses over into physical medicine as well.
Oh, psychology. I mean, I wish people would stop trying to divorce psychology from physical medicine as much as they do, including the American Psychological Association. Like, psychology is far, far closer to being, like, I actually think psychologists should always work under the supervision of a medical doctor. Like, yeah.
Under
a medical doctor. Because ultimately, I think psychology should mostly be grounded in neurology. Mostly.
Okay. We're gonna go to the. Forgive me and bear with me, but like even if you find a physical problem, a neurological problem with a human being, and you assert that that's a problem, say, oh, this person has a neurological problem. You're resenting God.
What?
You're saying
from?
You're resenting the circumstance that this person is in. You're resenting God for that circumstance.
Okay, Ethan.
You're claiming that. Okay.
Ethan?
You're saying that God. You're saying God put you in this position. God gave you these circumstances, and that's a problem. You're arguing with God at this point.
Oh yes, I argue with God. And do you know what the word Israel means?
Okay. You're judging God, or you're critiquing God.
Abraham, will the judge of all the world not do right? Like, I'm sorry. Like, now what you're saying is completely incoherent. Because so by that thing, like, how dare you take penicillin? Like, how dare you ever take any?
Maybe.
No, that's just nihilism. That's just nihilism.
No, that's not me. And you're gonna agree that if it's
Yeah, you don't believe that either. You don't believe that there's no place for penicillin in this world.
no, no, you're right. I don't believe that.
So why is it that?
But if you think that the thing that penicillin cures or remedies, I guess that's probably the better word to use, is if you think that the thing that penicillin remedies is the supreme evil that must be conquered, you're gonna find yourself idolizing penicillin.
If you turn the physical and the material and the world into that which is most important, you're making you're making a huge mistake.
Right. So you see what's happening here is there's a war. There's an identifying against the illness.
Illnesses exist. I keep on wanting to say, you just need to read your Bible more.
I don't read the Bible.
Yeah, I've noticed. You need to read the Bible more.
I think that maybe that's okay. Maybe that's a good complaint, but I don't. You can't convince me that reading the Bible is going to make things better for me.
Really? What kind? Which kind of Christianity doesn't believe?
I let my priest read the Bible to me.
No. That's read the Bible to you. There's no form of Christianity, none, zero, which believes that there's no place in reading the Bible yourself.
Absolutely, there is.
There is not.
Absolutely. Not everyone should read the Bible.
Go ask your priest if you should read your Bible.
I'm not going to ask him that.
I know you're not going to ask him that. The same way as I do. No, you are rebelling against your own intellect. Stop.
What's wrong with that? I'm not rebelling against my own intellect. I'm skeptical against my own intellect.
Skepticism of your intellect is fine, but guess
what?
It is all you have.
No, it's not. I have a priest. I have a hierarchy above me.
Okay, so ask your priest if you should read your Bible more.
I'm not going to ask him that.
Yeah, why?
Because I love my priest.
And if he says yes?
I'm not going to let him say yes.
Why? Because you don't want him to say yes? You're rebelling. You are rebelling. You're a very rebellious person, Ethan. You know you are.
I am.
You are.
I don't want to take that gamble. But I think that it could very well go. I think it's very plausible that he might tell me not to read it. Now, I could frame the question. I said, should I read the Bible? Should I stay home and read the Bible, or should I come to liturgy and listen to you read it to me?
Hey, I think you should go to liturgy and listen to him read it to you.
If I said which one is better, he's gonna say. I definitely know what he's gonna say.
That's what I would say. You should definitely go to church more. You should definitely go to church more. There is no question in my mind. You should definitely go to church more. It's almost like you're trying to pick a fight with me where there's no disagreement. I don't even see the disagreement.
I don't. I read parts of the Bible. I've kind of already gotten myself into what do you call it? They call it the primordial creation story. I've already delved myself into that. I've read it so many times, so I will revisit that, and I revisit John 1 frequently. That's about it.
John
if-
was not a narrative. I mean, it is a narrative, but like the greatest parts of the Bible are actually the narratives of like the people, like the life of Abraham and Cain and Abel, and like the actual stories of Jacob and Esau and David and Bathsheba, right? It's like the actual stories. And it's very unfortunate that we don't read, like, sit down and read the book of Jonah from beginning to end. It's only 4 chapters. Just read it from beginning to end. As a story, not verse by verse. Like a story.
Mm-hmm. I would probably do that. I'm fine with doing that. I'm much more wary about the gospel, the gospels, and even the letters, the epistles.
Yeah, don't read the epistles.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Because I hear people that I regard very highly, struggling with these epistles. And I'm like, well, if that person's struggling and getting in fistfights with Paul, I don't really want to dive into it myself.
There's no reason why anyone should read anything Paul wrote.
Okay, well, all right, I'll agree with you. I won't read it. I'll let somebody else read it to me that I trust.
You can yeah. Don't nobody's ever accused me of suggesting they need to read Paul. Okay. In 2 minutes, I am going to put an end to this stream because I do have to get to bed.
It's early for you to go to bed.
I've been now with like all my stuff. I've been going to bed early.
Okay. We've got a lot of. There's a lot of comments in there. Okay. Read the Bible. Just read the Bible and just not Paul. Super. Okay. So this psychology thing, Jacob, I think this always comes to the nature of evil with you and me. I think we're just axiomatically different on this.
Why? Evil is that which God does not like.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We can agree on that.
I don't know that we've actually disagreed about anything fundamental.
I can't see any redeeming factor in psychology. I think that psychology is fundamentally flawed because it attempts to materialize problems that are spiritual.
I think
let me tell you something. Like as a Christian, we have no problem with we have no problem with suffering. No problem with this is probably the wrong word to use. I already said this tonight. We have no problem with arbitrary circumstances that entail suffering. That's not a problem for a Christian.
I disagree, man. The world to come has no suffering.
What?
The world to come has no suffering.
I can't understand him.
He said the world to come has no suffering.
Of course it does.
The world to come?
Get the fuck out of here.
Okay. Ethan, we've decided you need to read your Bible more. I'm going
No. Okay.